A Warhammer 40k CRPG is such a perfect combo that is surely only the machinations of the Chaos Gods themselves that we haven't gotten one earlier. The universe's deep lore, larger-than-life characters, and galaxy-wide conflicts lasting centuries or even longer seems perfect for the RPG genre, which excels at precisely all of that. But we finally got one now and was worth the wait, both for 40k fans and those looking to get into it. And all we had to do was sacrifice the GW website and all those Leagues of Wotan novels to the warp before anyone could read them. But is Rogue Trader a good entry point to Warhammer 40k? Well, it's Warhammer, so just learning about a single faction is like peering into the all-enveloping void and then seeing nothing but the Necronomicon that is the 40k lore staring back at you, unblinking and always watching. So, nothing will ever be a great starting point, just because there's so much. But as a springboard into the gaping, all-encompassing maw that is 40k, it's fairly good. Making you Rogue Trader gives the game a good excuse to explain some things to you, because Rogue Trader in lore are kind of like sanctioned pirates. They have an awful lot of freedom to do whatever they want so long as it's in the name of the Big E himself as they explore the furthest reaches of space. So your character as a new trader is constantly coming across various aliens and factions that they recently wouldn't know too much about, so it doesn't feel too weird when you select the dialogue option asking for the number of that leather-bound space elf and why everyone suddenly wants to stay away from you. You'll also get some words highlighted in dialogue, and if you hover over them, it'll give you a drop-down menu just quickly explaining what it is. So it's about as good of an entry point as you could hope for. It does a good job of providing that info to newcomers without it getting in the way of the more hardcore nerds like me, all while wrapping it up in a genuinely good story that even non-Warhammer nerds can enjoy, filled with plenty of mysteries and plot twists to uncover, interesting characters to explore, and betrayal to swear vengeance over. Your gradually expanding cast of companions that span a decent chunk of the Warhammer species, well, at least the ones that wouldn't immediately kill you, were particularly interesting. Like Sister Argenta and how it hints at a mysterious shame in her past that you uncover as you earn her trust, or Pascal, the resident mechanicus in his quest to find his mentor, but for some reason keeps coming across people with the same name as him. His story doesn't quite add up and just gets weirder and weirder the more you learn about it. And like any good RPG, you make choices that can affect the world and these characters. And it's the companions that really made it for me. I literally spent hours just listening to companions talk and learning about them. And since you get such a variety of companions from across the 40k mythos, it also gives the game and the player a perfect opportunity to learn about their respective faction, helping you learn a little bit about a decent chunk of all the major factions in 40k. So if you've always been interested in 40k but always been overwhelmed by just the sheer amount of lore, this game's great story and compelling characters being there to pull you through all the made up words while you try to absorb all the lore is a great starting point, so long as you also get over all the stats and numbers. And you do have a kind of morality system that categorizes some of your choices into either dogmatic, for the Emperor, iconoclast, for the people, or heretical, for the Skull Throne. These are basically stats that you improve by picking them in dialogue, which in turn allow you to do it more, and eventually you'll have to dedicate yourself to one or the other. But not all choices fall into these categories, allowing you the freedom to really craft your character's personality without making them into a one-note character. You can be a dogmatic type who still tries to help people where they can, or maybe seeing how the Imperium has failed the people leads you down a path of heresy. Also, you can just be an asshole. Like, you can be evil, of course, but you can be such an asshole in this game. Like, there's this one mission early on where you have to talk to some orphans, but you never have to actually talk to them. Of course not, you're the rogue trader, you're above that. You only have to talk to your servant and tell the servant to repeat what you say instead, as if your very words are just too good for the rabble. Or later on, you can find a guy on a secret mission for the Imperium, and you can convince him to tell you what his mission is, and then maim him for giving away secrets. The secrets you convinced him to give you. It's hilarious. And your choices at least felt like they meant something, and even just knowing that the forces of chaos were there trying to manipulate me, even if it just amounted to flavor text sometimes, had me second guessing some already difficult choices. I had one mission early on where we went to a station to find a navigator, only to find that station in ruins. Once I entered the station, I saw a guy interrogating and executing some people. He explained they were traitors who had this lady captured and needed us to help them rescue her. It all seemed suspicious at first, and through interactions with the supposed traitors by way of Chainsword, and the grace of the Great Machine God allowing me to read some messages, I became even more suspicious of him. I eventually confronted the guy, only for my companion to see into the future to warn of two paths, both drenched in blood, and one being paved by the forces of chaos. Suddenly, I didn't know if I could actually trust the evidence I had found suggesting that the guy was a traitor. Was it all just the machinations of chaos trying to trick me into betraying an innocent man for their grand plan? Or was that timely prediction a demonic trick? It's just like any choice in any other RPG of this ilk, but I couldn't help but wonder. But as fun as the story is, it's still a lot of lore. It throws a lot of proper nouns at you, but it wraps it all up in a compelling story that's not just good for a Warhammer game, but just good, period. It has a really interesting story about legacy and whether or not you carry on said legacy of the previous rogue trader exactly how she would, or do you do your own thing? Especially early on when your right hand Abelard is telling you about your predecessor and how she would handle things right before you're given the choice. The RPG genre, with its focus on choice and consequences, is perfect for a theme like this. And like all CRPGs, there's an awful lot of numbers and stats in this game as well. If you're a seasoned CRPG nerd, it's fine, you're used to this. The ballistic stat is just the gun stat, the gun go daka better stat, toughness is just defense, and etc. Just swap out the words for the lexicon you're most familiar with. And Warhammer fans are very used to number crunching. If you're new to the genre, well, that's where the customizable difficulty can simplify a lot of that for you if you want. There's both a story mode for those who only care about that, but also a highly customizable custom difficulty mode that lets you change just about everything from health values to dice rolls to just about every nitty-gritty thing you could want, allowing you to make the game not only as hard or as easy as you want, you can make it harder or easier in specific areas that may be annoying to you, making the game deceptively accessible. But I like all the numbers personally. I like that the game has me sitting there contemplating every point I place and every skill I get to make the best rogue trader. As far as the gameplay goes, it's a strategy game like XCOM, but it's also a very nitty-gritty RPG, which means you can have an awful lot of abilities from across your team of 6 to juggle. Main characters have a mix of different attacks and buffs, but of course they'll lean one way or another depending on how you build them. Companions like Abelard, for example, who are melee focused, can do like a charge to get them into melee range faster, but also have buffs to their stats to hit harder and make them tankier. Meanwhile, I built my Mechanicus companion Pascal as more like a melee assassin, so they don't have a charge but instead have plenty of skills to debuff and expose weaknesses on enemies, giving them more damage, at the cost of survivability. One of his skills will make a target appear around an enemy, and if he hits the enemy from that side, it hits even harder, so Pascal often requires more setup to get him going, but it's worth it, and Abelard can go in and soak some damage in the meantime. Meanwhile, I loved pairing my sister with Battle Argenta, who's all about shooting things as much as possible with Cassia or Jai, who can not only buff Argenta, but also give her an additional action, meaning if I picked my targets right, I could take out like 4 guys in one turn. And my Psyker was all about fire, AoE, and melting armor, but you have to worry about friendly fire. Spraying and praying, no matter how much you pray to the God Emperor himself, can and will hit your own characters if you're not careful. And Psykers in particular are powerful, but it's all too easy for one of their attacks to arc to a companion, or accidentally summon a demon. Whoops, happens to every Psyker now and then. And with 10 recruitable companions, there's tons of combos you can make. Not to mention the skill trees. Each character starts off with their own respective class, and of course you get to pick your skills and abilities as you level up, but once that tree is maxed out, which doesn't take too long, you can pick a second skill tree from 3 options, allowing for that much more customization to make your perfect team. In combat, you spend action points to attack and use abilities, with movement being its own separate resource, but because a lot of skills didn't cost very many action points, and since you can only attack once per turn, barring certain skills, it did get me to use those non-damage dealing skills a lot more, because I felt like it would be a waste if I didn't. And once I got a taste of just how good those skills could be, they became a mainstay in my strategies. But I found movement to be kind of small, especially at the beginning of the game, making the one passive skill that increases your movement by 2 a must-get for every single character. And if it's a must-get, I can't help but ask, well, why isn't that just the default movement then? It's kind of like Squad Sight in XCOM. It was so necessary that they just made it a default skill in the sequel. Outside of combat, there's a lot of things that do a good job of giving you that 40k/rogue trader fantasy, although a lot of them overstay their welcome. For example, there's a chance your Psyker might just summon a demon by accident, accurate to the lore, and while Psykers are powerful, so is a sniper rifle. So why would I risk summoning a powerful enemy, likely right next to my most vulnerable companions, when I could just have a dude with a gun? Because Psykers are cool, that's why, but it dissuades you from using the coolest class in my opinion. Traveling is also faithful to the lore. You can only take certain paths to get to certain systems, and you can spend a resource called Insight to make paths safer or make entirely new ones. Cool, but there's a few problems. The big one is Insight is kind of limited. You can get through some random events and exploring, but if you spend too much making routes safe or making new, more convenient ones, it's totally possible to just run out, which can lock off certain story-centric systems. Meaning you'll have to fly through unsafe routes, hoping to get the random event that gives you insight, and second, you can't just go to the system you want unless it's right next to you. So if you want to go to a system that's far away, you have to make your way there system by system, which just gets tedious after a while. This is especially true of traveling unsafe routes, where the same handful of events can occur, or even demon invasions on your ship, which, again, were really cool at first, but got old fast because they all felt very similar to one another, and just kept me from getting to where I actually wanted to go. You can also take over entire planets, governing them and building them out, rewarding you with items and even skills. You'll get random events requiring you to make a choice, but some require you to travel back to that planet in person, disrupting your adventure and making you travel halfway across the system just to make one dialogue option that could have really just been an email. Space combat also got old after a while. It's turn-based like the on-foot combat, and again, some of the ideas are cool on paper. I like that ships have momentum, so if you move, you have to move a minimum amount. You can only move in a cone in front of you, and your ship also has weapons on the front and sides which have different firing patterns, so you can't just fire everything! You have to plan and line things up properly, adding an extra layer of strategy. If you do it right, you can attack multiple times. The ship even has its own skill tree, upgrade system, and you can assign characters to different positions on the ship to give bonuses. But there wasn't enough enemy variety to keep it interesting for me, and since you only ever have one ship, it felt like I was spending a lot of time watching an enemy attack me so I can just rattle off one or two shots. But the game does have some nice quality of life features that I wish other big RPGs this year would have had. For example, you don't need to loot every single individual body after a fight. Instead, you loot one and it'll show you the loot from every body in the general area. Not the whole room, unfortunately, so you're still going to have to run around and click a few bodies, but it does cut it down and save you some time. And if you do miss anything when you leave the room, it'll just show you the loot you missed and double check if you want it. You also don't have to worry about switching to certain characters for stat checks, it just automatically applies the best stat from the active party. So if you get a tech stat check, but built your character like a lovable Ogren who's just trying his best, so long as you have someone with a good tech stat on your team, they will be the one making the check. And best of all, if you pass an awareness check and find a trap, the game pauses and gives you time to react. That was one of my problems with Baldur's Gate 3. I'd succeed a stat check but still get hit by the trap. Not here. Unfortunately, I did come across some glitches in the game. I almost got locked out of recruiting a companion named Jai who requires your help getting some of her cargo back and asks you to meet her at the warehouse to help out. I went and there was supposed to be a scene where she leads you up a ramp where a fight starts, and she did not do this for me. Instead, just nothing happened. If I talked to her, she acted like she didn't know me. I could go up the ramp myself and initiate the fight, and Jai would even join in, but there was supposed to be another scene afterwards, which just also wouldn't play for me. I was soft locked out of Best Girl. Luckily, I found a workaround. I just had to enter the building with a proper formation for some reason. I call it the Luck of Slanesh. I had another glitch where my character would just become invincible after sleeping with Jai, turning me into a walking, talking, floating weapons, which in a way is the most Warhammer thing you can think of. Rogue Trader ends up being a great introduction to 40k with some fascinating characters and deep combat that will scratch any RPG fan's itch, all wrapped up in a great story that will pull you through and teach you all the dense lore of 40k. Some of its mechanics can get a little tedious and it's definitely not the best RPG of the year, but it is still a really good one, worthy of any 40k fan or anyone looking to get into the universe. So grab your bolter and get ready to
kill chaos.
Know when you're beaten!